I experienced a complete end of psychological activity. There was no thought, no memory. It was a complete annihilation. I've experienced the rise and fall of Egypt. I was part of the rise and fall of Tibet. I experienced many of these civilizations rising and falling. Before every fall came a spiritual corruption. The technology was used to disconnect the individual from the divine current. And this is the Atlantean karma, and it is repeating.
Guy here, welcome to my podcast. My awesome guest today is Julian Polzin, and boy, does this podcast go deep. Not only do we get into his own experience from being a psychotherapist to his spiritual awakening to past life remembrances, but we dive into the topic of cycles and the rise and fall of civilizations and, you know, where we are right now on our evolution as humanity. It's a fascinating conversation, and he shares his perspectives of what he's seen, what he's shared, and what he believes is happening collectively right now. Now, one thing I want to mention is, you know, some of these conversations can challenge people's worldview. That's okay. What I like to do with these podcasts is look at them more like an invitation of a discussion. And when people share their views, I like to reflect on them, stay open, and think deeply about what's been spoken about, and then, you know, apply it in my own life with what resonates. And I've always felt that with all my podcast guests, and this one's no different today. So I felt like I wanted to share that with you as well. But of course, let me know where you are in the world. Let me know what you think of this conversation with Julian. He's a good guy. We had some fun, and he's based out in Peru. I mean, it's pretty remarkable what he's doing. And of course, let me know where you are in the world. All these ways to connect is always beautiful. We will be in Bali in June this year. Our retreat is selling out. If you want to come and join us for 5 days, Mastering Your Inner Mystic, please come and join us in Bali in June 2026. End of June, I should say. You won't regret it. You will be with some amazing, beautiful souls. There's other resources below in the description as well if you want to find out more of what we're up to. Anyway, much love from me. I hope to get to meet you in person somewhere someday soon. Enjoy this podcast. See ya. Here we are. We are recording. Julian, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Mate, I couldn't resist when I kind of glanced at your journey, and, you know, and now you're out in Peru. I thought, wow, this is a guy that's living a very sincere, authentic life. And, you know, you're doing a good message out there. So it's my pleasure to be able to amplify it if I can in any way, and introduce you to, you know, my audience and many others that will stumble across it. So I have no doubt today will be a great conversation, mate. And if I was next to you and you're a complete stranger at an intimate dinner party, say, and I asked you what you did for a living, though, how would you respond?
Well, originally, I worked as a psychotherapist in Germany for 7 years. And I was ready to settle into that. I was like, okay, this is the meaning of my life. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of this temporary existence. But then the divine has other plans. So I went through an awakening experience. It must have been around, I think, 2016, where I experienced a profound loss in my life. And at the time, I didn't meditate. I wasn't a spiritual practitioner. I was solely working as a psychotherapist. But then after this loss that I experienced, I tried to deal with the grief that I was experiencing. And I started walking on a graveyard every day. And mind you, graveyards in Europe, they're very beautiful. They're ancient, beautiful gravestones, old trees. And I started sitting on the park benches there, not really understanding what I was doing. But for half a year, I was sitting there watching the gravestones, watching when people died. There were soldiers from World War II on that gravestone. So it gives you a good perspective about impermanence. And I watched the grief of my ego. I watched the noise, how it was screaming, how it was yelling. And I didn't understand that I began detaching from the ego idea. So at some point, I was watching this illusion to such a degree that I felt, oh, this pain, this noise is so over-exaggerated. It started to seem unreal to me. I stopped believing in it. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I entered the state that, if we would use technical terms, would be Samadhi. So I experienced a complete end of psychological activity. There was no thought, no memory, no psychic activity, no personality, no identity. It was a complete annihilation. And this annihilation happened while watching these thoughts and having this very simple idea where I said, I'm so tired of fighting this pain. So something in me completely surrendered. And in that moment of surrender, personality was annihilated. Sense of time was gone. There was no sense of past or future. There was simply awareness left, and not even an I sense attached to the body. I was watching the body, but there was no feeling of this is me. And this is how it started.
I'll jump in there. Thank you for sharing. So did you say you were on a park bench when you experienced Samadhi, or was that in a meditation? Or how did it come about, that awakening?
It was on a park bench,
Yeah.
And I wasn't practicing meditation.
You were just present.
Yes, I was just watching, but I didn't realize, and we can get into that at some point, the reason I woke up that day, of course, is not an accident. So after I experienced Samadhi, so the complete annihilation of identity, which I was in for maybe 2 weeks, I had 3 or 4 thoughts a day. That was it.
Holy
I could still move, I could still act intelligently with my environment, but I had no sense of identity except I am awareness, I am emptiness. And that wasn't even a thought, just an experience.
Did you have anyone else around you that you were confiding in this? Or was you just like by yourself, leaning into, you know, the Eckhart Tolles of the world and things like that, who speak about these experiences?
See, that's an interesting thing, because I wasn't in touch with any of that. So it happened completely organically. Yeah. Interestingly, when you speak about Eckhart Tolle, I started reading The Power of Now shortly after experiencing Samadhi. And when reading it, I realized, oh, the exact same thing that he described, I experienced. So that kind of put it together at the time. But the reason Samadhi actually occurred for somebody who wasn't practicing, because it's very important to discern the ego from the soul. The personality is not the soul. And shortly after Samadhi, I started writing down Zen poems. And for some reason, started writing a whole system of Zen-Buddhist practice that Julian the person was never initiated in or had any formal training in, but it was utterly precise. So I started channeling that basically from my own subconscious through the state of Samadhi. But then later, through more advanced forms of yoga that I simply knew how to do. Nobody instructed me in any of this. I would simply have deja vu of how to do it. I would sit down in meditation and the proper practices would arise. So I started practicing pranayama. Then I started practicing Kundalini yoga. And suddenly I started remembering my past lives. And in many of these past lives, I have been living as a yogi, many times as a Buddhist monk. I was a Zen-Buddhist monk in Japan. But I also experienced many lifetimes of being a monk in Tibet, as well as a yogi in India and a tantric practitioner. So then I started having first these deja vus. I remember one time I was sitting in meditation at home, and suddenly my body language started changing. And like somebody else had entered me. And after meditation, I got up, I was standing in the kitchen, and my wife suddenly walks in and says, "Julian, you are you, but you're also not you." So she was recognizing that suddenly a past life of me had taken control. And through that, downloads would occur, that yogic systems would be transmitted into my nervous system. And then I would start applying these practices.
So you felt the presence of a past life? Because I meditate daily, you know, I was up to 5 a.m. every morning, and I feel presence come in to the field. And you're saying you felt your past life come into you. Did you know it was a past life of your own soul, or at that point? How does that work?
Well, interestingly, in the way that the divine confirms these type of experience, because confirmation is important. It usually starts with a hunch, a sense of deja vu, and something that shouldn't be natural to your current personality. Suddenly you do it in a very natural way, like you have done it 100,000 times out of nowhere. But there is a profound, deep stillness and knowing behind it that you have done this before. So when that occurs, slowly through the effects of the yoga that are then practiced, that leads to more details and synchronicities. And at some point, it was more than deja vu. At some point, I would, for example, sit in meditation and I would open my eyes somewhere in India in an ashram and look at my students. Like 200 years earlier.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, or I would go to certain places. For example, I did a pilgrimage in Nepal in 2021, and the locals treated me like a local, and they came to me for teaching to this like white guy yogi. I'm like, why are you coming to me, people? But they sensed something about my, let's say, connection to the place. And when I would walk to temples, for example, or to certain places in nature, I would have flashbacks of having been there. There was, for example, a river in Nepal where I washed myself in, and I had a glimpse of a Buddhist monk. That was me collecting water with a vase from the exact same river in the exact same spot.
Wow. Wow. So when this was unraveling, I'm speaking with all the listeners in mind here, okay, Julian, as well. Like, it's like when those moments started unraveling, to me, like you're sharing it very calmly. Like, was it like shocking and wondrous, or was this like, oh, I just now remember I had all these lives, and you're just slowly integrating it, like, because even the way you described the grief, I know you haven't touched on who you were grieving or anything, but the way you described the grief in that process, it feels like a very held space that you've been able to do from the moment that unraveling, that unwinding out of your personality started to happen. Is that right, or am I off the mark here?
Well, to be straightforward, the conclusion always sounds calm, yeah, in retrospect. But of course, when it started happening, initially in the Samadhi experience, this is ultimate peace. There's actually nothing beyond that. So in the Samadhi moment, there's no suffering whatsoever. But what then happened later is when I started remembering my past lives, then suddenly identity starts forming again. Because the problem is, let's say the average human being struggles with their own memory, with their childhood memory, with what happened in high school, with maybe certain traumas that they have experienced in life. But when you suddenly can remember hundreds of lifetimes, also of severe trauma, then it becomes very challenging, because the ego will try to grab a hold of this and build a new identity. And then a battle starts within the yogi. Then there needs to be renunciation of identity. And these enormous psychic currents that then occur, especially when higher forms of yoga are performed, if there's any attachment to, for example, fame, to worldly desire, to money, to sexuality, whatever it is, it will lead to a destabilizing energy, and it would lead to psychosis. It's just, first of all, I had a psychotherapy education, so I could kind of understand what was going on with me on that level. But also simply the strong intuitive knowing that I had done this before. So it wasn't the first time going through it, even though to the current personality, it seems to be a novelty. But the challenge is indeed to not be reactive, because ego is actually reactivity. Karma is literally that, reactivity. So the key is to have a very strong basic mindfulness practice that leads to a detachment from psychic content, so identity cannot arise. And that's why these type of experiences, they don't happen for average people, because it would throw them into psychosis. They wouldn't be able to integrate that. Therefore, it takes a lot of preparation. And one of the best systems to prepare oneself for such events is the Buddhist system. Because the Buddhist system is an ego deconstruction system. It's basically the practice, if you think about Zen-Buddhist practice in Japan, for example, it is the practice to cultivate the opposite of a fight or flight state. Yeah, because a fight or flight state, for example, if you would get into a car crash, the first thing your body would do is raise your hands to protect your head. You would raise your shoulders, you would harden your jaw, right? This is the fight or flight response. And when you look at Zen practice, for example, it's the very opposite. It's the dropping of the shoulders, the straightening of the spine, it's the extending of the out breath. And when we practice that extensively, we can deal with higher voltages of psychic current without having a contraction in the system. Because if there's a contraction, there's attachment, and it creates ego and identity. And then the practitioner is in trouble.
That really resonates. Absolutely. I love the way you break that down. Totally. That's fantastic. So on this journey then, let's just get to how you ended up in Peru. And when did you quit your day job? You said you were practicing for 7 years. You're having all these experiences. Was there a definitive moment like, right, I'm going to follow this path, detach from, surrender to it fully and trust in the universal guidance 100%? Because that's what it feels like you're doing. And, that's not easy to do in any shape.
But there's no other way of doing it. Yeah. When people think, and this is what I see in many practitioners at this time, they think they can commit to spiritual practice 80%, 85%, maybe 70%. But surrender to God must be total. Yeah. And now we live in an age of a psychic gold rush. Yeah, people starting having astral experiences, and they get very high on that, which, by the way, is the Atlantean karma. We can get into that if you're interested. So when we start opening up psychically, it's very important to understand this is a new realm of attachment. Yeah, before people were chasing Ferraris, BMWs, sex experiences. And then suddenly there are these new objects of ego attachment. Oh, I had a Kundalini awakening. And it becomes a new form of narcissism. But to answer your question of why I ended up in Peru and why I'm following this guidance, because in the many lifetimes of spiritual training that I have received in many different systems, it was always about full concentration on God. Yeah, even as it says in the Bible, let thine eye be single pointedness. And when you leave any gap for the ego, when you say, I take something from God, now I become a spiritual coach and I create this business, dishonesty starts entering. Everything must be God's. The person, the ego, doesn't own anything. And that was also the struggle in my psychotherapy practice, because I felt I couldn't be authentic with people anymore, because I was looking through the whole charade of the psychiatry system. Even though psychotherapy can be very useful, the issue that I saw profoundly, it was all about reprogramming mind, but it wasn't about transcending mind. So it was a lower form of practice, so to speak, that helps many people understand that. But when somebody goes through a spiritual awakening that is profound, their own identity that is created cannot survive that experience. And it was very clear to me that if I want to be of assistance to the collective consciousness or to society, then I have to fully commit to the spiritual path. And I realized when I started doing psychotherapy with people that this would impose limitations. And these limitations I couldn't accept anymore.
But I'm just curious, do you feel when you're seeing people like that, would they be open and do they want to know the whole truth? Are they ready for that? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely not.
Exactly. So it's challenging, isn't it? You know, because it's like the question I ponder on often is, are we being denied to recognize our own divinity? Like, is the world set up in such a way that it's almost like they don't want you to know? Or is it just through our own sheer ignorance that we've just separated ourselves from it and got involved in the gold rush that's happening? It's certainly technological that's happening, right? That we give our power to AI, we give our power to the iPad, the screens, all that's drawing our attention and is pulling us away from ourselves and actually the most advanced AI technology on the planet, which is our bodies, you know? So it's fascinating. I was just wondering if you have an opinion on that.
Well, that's profound what you just said. And I will tell you that you subconsciously remember more than you think you remember, because the statement that you just made is a very profound one. So I give you an example of where this all started. Technology, transhumanism versus divine law, and let's say in the spiritual, mystical schools that would compete with that. In the Atlantean age, and that was interesting because when I was already in Peru, at some point I was lying in bed at night and I had a 3-hour nonstop vision of Atlantis, like I was there in great detail. And what I saw was profound. There were two major factions in Atlantis. One were the children of the law of one. These were those who were following divine law. And they had a great spiritual teacher, Grandmaster Thoth. And Grandmaster Thoth was actually debating the transhumanists in the council chamber in the realm of politics. So basically like the main body of a nation, where all the politicians gather. So he was debating there the transhumanists. He was standing tall and he was saying to the transhumanists who were believing at the time that they were evolving. The transhumanists were believing that if they use technology to enhance their bodies, that they would evolve to a more divine state, but they were actually perverting their systems through genetic modification, through introducing technology into the system. And these two type of factions in Atlantis, those who were serving the light were those who later became the yogis. And they said, go within, know thyself. But the majority wanted to be led and was actually afraid to do that, because if you go within, you have to face your own darkness. You have to face your shadows. And they didn't want to do that. So they were looking for some sort of externalization of the divine. And every time there's an externalization, it becomes a perversion, it becomes a distortion. So then those people who got high on this type of spiritual gold rush, the opening up of the astral realms at the time, they would get in touch with entities, for example, reptilian entities, dark AI entities that existed on the lower astral plane. And this might be fascinating for people because technology can exist in the astral. It's just much more subtle. So those dark priests who got in touch with this type of intelligence, they got tempted because the beings who were inhabiting those dimensions were much more experienced in those dimensions. So they had the drop on those human priests. And they would trick them by saying, if we give you a certain technology, or if we bombard your brain with a certain frequency, you will be intellectually enhanced. And that's what they did. So interestingly, the intellect as we know it right now, the Western mind, is actually the Atlantean mind. And through this frequency bombardment that they did with technology, it led to a hyperactive intellect and the killing of the intuition. Suddenly the soul was boxed in a body with a hyperactive mind and couldn't sense the law of God anymore, or the voice of God, couldn't hear it anymore, because there was the constant repeating of obsessive, compulsive thought mechanisms. So these type of dark entities successfully cut off a certain part of humanity from the intuitive perception of the divine. But in their hubris, the Atlanteans did not admit the mistake. Like an addict, they would do more augmentations and fall even further. Master Thoth saw all of this coming. And this is why he went with his master students to Egypt to create new mystery schools, because he knew in Atlantis these type of mystical systems could not survive. And since all of this is synchronistic, right now we are in society in the same situation. AI is coming up, transhumanism coming up. certain agents have been introduced into the human system. I'm saying popular injections in the last 2 years because of a so-called pandemic. And these popular injections, at the time, I wasn't thinking much about it, but it was actually happening when I was on my pilgrimage in Nepal. And I was in a meditation group at the time. And there was a local young man who said he just got his injection in the shoulder. I'm not saying a certain word on purpose because I don't want you to get demonetized. So he got the injection in the shoulder, and I was meditating, and I saw his energy body in meditation. And usually if I see a human energy body, the etherical field, I see it in a beautiful orange to golden color. Now, the rest of his body was in golden orange color, but his shoulder was completely black, completely atrophied, and black strands were moving from the shoulder into the heart vortex, and the heart vortex was completely degenerating in that moment, was becoming black, looked like a shriveled mushroom. And in that moment, it dawned on me that the technology was used to disconnect the individual from the divine current. And this is the Atlantean karma, and it is repeating. And we had a timeline split in that moment when that agent was reduced into humanity, because everybody had to make a choice upon this, to either take an injection or not take an injection. So when you say our bodies, they're the best AI there is, you know something deep down that actually through yoga, through proper spiritual practice, through concentration on God, we elevate these bodies naturally, and they don't have to be enhanced by technology, which actually inhibits the ability to then ascend spiritually.
Wow, there's a lot in there. Yeah, look, it's interesting that you tell it, because I've had Greg Braden come on talk about this. He just released a book called Pure Human at the beginning of 2025. He's actually coming back on next week to dive deeper into these kind of topics that you're speaking of right now. What was the fall of Atlantis then? How did it collapse? Like, have you seen that in your own meditations and experiences?
Yeah. So the transhumanist side, what they try to do, they try to create a machine to turn human beings into a pure energy state. But in order to power that machine, they start drilling into the earth core, and they destabilize the tectonic plates. And when they did that, earthquakes started happening, tsunamis started happening. But as far as I understand, what I saw was the final collapse of Atlantis. There have been several catastrophic events before the final collapse. So then, by trying to build an ascension engine, they try to basically bypass the law of God. And the truth is that in spiritual practice, there are no shortcuts. Any shortcut is the long way around. I want to be very clear on this. If we try to enhance ourselves, if we try to, for example, use psychedelics instead of yoga, if we try to use technology instead of meditation, if we try to do these things, they have karmic consequences, and they actually keep the soul entrapped longer. But because the Atlanteans wanted to progress, they tried to use technology to skip ahead, to not having to do the shadow work, to not face their own inner ugliness. So by trying to insert a cheat code into the system, they doomed themselves.
Fascinating. The thing is, like, when I look at today, because I'm in front of a lot of people, I see people all the time, and many people are not even aware of their own shadow work in the first place. Like, they're so identify with the personality and their experience and their perception of it. They're unable to they haven't developed any kind of awareness to separate themselves from their mind, their emotions and their feelings, and actually look at it from a different vantage point. Do you know what I'm saying? So
yes.
So it's to even talk, to start to wrap your head around the very concepts you're speaking of can feel such a cognitive distance, like such a million miles away, because I can't even manage my own inner feelings, and I'm not even going to go there. So I'm just going to throw rocks at the world and just say how bad it is, and look for my little spiritual rushes and my different experiences, whether it be alcohol, drugs, breath work, whatever it might be, to get myself high, and actually never deal with it anyway. So, with all that in mind, I'm curious to know as well. Then, because you speak about the astral plane, and you speak about different energies, tricksters, different, you know, elementals that can actually influence us. Why is that happening on this playing field then? How is all this come together? What are they getting from it if that is going on?
Right. Well, first of all, negative entities or demonic entities, they have a reason for existence. And the reason for existence is they are the free will agents. Because in truth, when a practitioner, and it doesn't matter what tradition the practitioner is from, if he's Christian, if he's Hindu, if he's Buddhist, but when he starts focusing on God, they are practicing to surrender their own separate will. So they want the mind of God to replace their own little mind. Yeah? And that is fusion or yoga, if you will. And dark entities, their purpose is to delay that. So they offer the opposite of divine will. So, for example, you sit in meditation and suddenly you hear, I'm tired of meditation right now. I rather go, let's say, watch some pornography or whatever. These little voices, these are actually demonic influences from the lower astral. And what do they get from it? Well, that's very simple. They themselves are not directly connected to God. So they need energy. They're energy addicts. So they need source beings that are connected to God so they can steal energy from. And they do this in such a way that they, for example, try to, through suggestion, get you into actions that go against divine law. For example, sexual perversions, violence, addictions, materialism. So they try to give you these type of some temptations and impulses. And we feel this in the lower part of the body, everything below the solar plexus. And when we feel impulses there, if we respond to these impulses, the dark entities, they gain in energy because we are now starting to emit frequencies that they can exist in. This is what they feed off. So they need a step-down version of divine energy. They cannot receive divine energy directly because if they would, their separation from God would cease. And separation is what they strive for. So they try to get the human who is experiencing both, that means soul and the lower astral, and they basically try to compete over the soul. Will the soul identify with the lower astral? Then they gain in energy. If the soul identifies with God, they lose in energy. So it's a competition over the soul. And why is that happening in the lower astral? Because it's the frequency band that is the closest to the physical. So any genuine yogi actually will not interact with the astral plane much. They actually practice to destroy their own astral body and to get past the astral plane, to enter at a higher point where there is no interference. Think of the astral plane as a playing field where divine beings can play, but also demonic beings can play. But the divine beings have to step down their energy to be perceivable to the average practitioner. But a yogi will at some point, through renunciation, through the destruction of the ego desire, so the renunciation of sex, the renunciation of money, the renunciation of material things, the renunciation of fame, the renunciation of identity ultimately. Yeah, and the prayer to want to die into God. Through that concentration, the yogi begins destroying the connection to the astral plane within his own system. And through the destruction of the astral vehicle, liberation is achieved. But now many people believe when they get in touch with the astral realm, this is the new frontier. This is the new gold rush. This is the new excitement. But the exact same thing happened in Atlantis when the people started opening up collectively to the astral realm and became psychic, but they were all still in their egos. And that means they would fall into sexual temptations, they would fall into black magic, they would fall into abuse of divine energies. And this is the fall. So this is why when Buddha created his system of yoga, he did it with the Atlantean fall in mind. The Buddhist system was designed by Shakyamuni Buddha to destroy the karmic after effect of the Atlantean fall, and that means the intellect that is separated from God. So he created a non-reaction system because he figured out when we are responding to this mind and generate emotion, it imprisons us in the lower astral. But by not reacting, by renouncing the impulses of the mind and the emotional responses, we start starving the ego out. We stop reinforcing the prison bars.
My concern is that, you know, we live in a world, like I often think if you took somebody from another planet and dropped them onto Earth and say, hey, this is how we're living right now, you'd think you're living in a lunatic asylum. Like, what is going on? What are you all doing down here? Right? Like, it's crazy to think the way we've been conditioned to behave. So that's the first thing. The second thing is around that. Our attention span is so short these days. We're constantly stimulated. Our nervous systems are constantly stimulated. We suppress every single feeling and emotion. If we got a pain, we just medicate it. We don't even look at the root causes of these things unless we're really suffering, and then tried every option, and then we might start going down this path. So in this world of awakening, if we are starting to awaken up to more psychic abilities, if the veil is getting thinner for us as a species and we're starting to connect into it, without any foundation, if we're not being taught and shown the correct methodologies to actually really encompass it and stop rushing to get there as it to be another escapism, what hope have we got? You know, that's
none.
So, right. So it's
like, important to be honest about these things.
Yeah. Like, it fascinates me. It absolutely fascinates me. And you think, well, what's it going to take for us people to relinquish that grasp of what's happening in the world and say, you know what, I'm ready to go inward and just go slow and take it day by day and start integrating without the need to push for that extra materialistic thing, the need to push for that relationship because I don't feel right within myself. So all these things are distracting myself from what's going on within. You know, so like, I just wonder what's going to happen over the next 10, 15 years if we are continuing to open up, and how we're actually going to approach this and handle this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the experience for each soul will be different based on their karmic cocktail, because there's a very simple spiritual gravity going on. We attract what we are. So there are different timelines of experiences. So there are those, for example, who in the last soul reincarnation cycle did not do spiritual practice, did not focus on God, focused on ego gratification. They will experience a second fall like they did in Atlantis. And there are those, for example, who at the Atlantean time did do the proper spiritual practice, did connect with God. They went to Egypt, they went to Tibet, they went to South America, they built new societies, and they experienced what you could consider then the idea of a new earth. But the truth is, it has all happened before. So that's why this new age stuff, this idea of the new age, is highly problematic, because a genuine practitioner, a genuine yogi can connect to God in any cycle of soul evolution, in any yuga, and must transcend the current cycle of experience. So the focus on an age, the focus on an external event, on some sort of catalyst, is problematic, because one needs to do the right thing just for doing the right thing, and not because now I feel a spiritual gold rush and I want to manifest my perfect dream life quickly. This is narcissism. It's going to lead to a fall. So it's important to understand, and I want to share this, but not to create a sense of hopelessness, but to be real with people. In my own recall of my past lives, I've experienced hundreds of my past lives in meditation, and that means thousands and thousands and thousands of years of memory. I've experienced the rise and fall of Egypt. I was part of the rise and fall of Tibet. I experienced many of these civilizations rising and falling. I had experiences of the Inca Empire falling, before the Spanish invaded. And before every fall came a spiritual corruption. So, for example,
Isn't that
the Inca
interesting?
priests, yeah,
Wow. Yeah, okay.
the Inca priests, they got obsessed with gold and sex. They had like 3 or 4 underage wives, yeah, half of them pregnant, yeah, and I had visions where I was walking amongst the temples and I saw the dark astral energy pouring from the temples because they pervert their practices. So the genuine Inca priests at the time, they started warning the Inca king. They said, we're having visions of these white people coming. They're going to destroy our culture because we have abused our gifts. But nobody was listening. So then those priests, they went into the mountains. They became the Keros in Peru. Yeah. And in the same way, in Tibet, before the Chinese invasions, there were certain lamas who were warning the current Tibetan politicians in power, who were often priest politicians. Because you're misusing the practice, we are attracting the Chinese for an invasion. We're having warning of that. The deities are warning us. Was ignored.
Incredible.
Same thing in Atlantis.
So do you have views of what's happening right now then? Like, do you believe that we're coming to an end of a cycle and there's so many different varying opinions of what's happening on the planet right now, but what seems to be a common denominator from what I've experienced in talking to many people, but also keeping one eye out, is that we're in a very critical period in humanity right now. Like, we're in it, and how do you have thoughts of seeing it playing out? Like, have you seen it? What do you think?
I had some visions of that, and actually, yes, I think I can share this. In one of my lifetimes, I was a tantric practitioner in India. I was a priest of Kali. And I reconnected with that deity in my own practices in this lifetime. And she gave me a vision. And in this vision, I saw Earth from space. And you know how you see at night all the lights from the cities, the urban areas? And she showed me how that was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Because of the transhumanist agenda. Yeah, she showed me millions of people dying from certain injections before it was happening. But then what she also showed me was a resurrection. That's why the idea of the resurrection of the Christ, that's very important. She showed me that those who survive it create actually what you could consider the new Earth blueprint. And these are people who are highly spiritual, who live in nature, and are also highly technological. But it's not that dense in population. Yeah. So there is a timeline split, because at the end of every yuga, and this is the end of Kali Yuga right now, of the deepest amnesia of forgetting God, this is Kali Yuga. And it's now, since it's ending, there is a reawakening of the spiritual origin. However, depending on the choices that the souls have made over the last 75,000 years, if they have acted from egotism or if they have served God, they go into different realities. So for somebody, they might, if they are living deeply in the center of the matrix, they might experience it as cataclysmic, as a collapse, as severely traumatic. And then there are others, for example, who did something different in Atlantis. Those priests who went with Master Thoth to Egypt did not experience a fall. They experienced a rejuvenation by combining the Atlantean and the Egyptian spirit. Back then it was called Alchem. That was the name for Egypt. And it gave birth to the name alchemy, which is the spiritual transformation process. So the Atlanteans started teaching the Egyptians and built new societies. Some of the Atlanteans went to Tibet and were later some of the founders of Tibetan Buddhism. So it is important to understand that everything happens by law, that there are no accidents. And even though we may have great compassion for the suffering of those people who are not prepared. The reason these people are not prepared because they didn't do their homework. They choose selfishness and separateness over divine law. So there are two ways of learning. One is through suffering. That means indirect teaching, through pain. And one is by turning towards God. And the suffering is actually God's mercy. It's just perceived wrongly by the ego because the ego is resisting God's mercy, and through that resistance, the ego is experiencing psychological suffering through cognitive dissonance because it's not in a state of surrender. But if one surrenders, it turns into grace. Yeah? So there's a choice for each and every individual. And even those who are deeply asleep, they are in a natural state of soul evolution where immersion is still what they need in order for their own growth. Because the soul receives imprints, individualization through reincarnation. And it takes this imprints after death with it, even though it doesn't carry the person with it, the identity with it, but it keeps the memories. And this is how a soul creates wisdom. So those who are deeply asleep, it's just a different stage of evolution that they are in, and they're still learning through pain. They're not learning through direct communication with the divine. And that is also fine. But it might be subjectively hard to accept on a personal level. Yeah, when you care about individuals, when you care about society as a whole. But rest assured that everything that happens by law, and it is ultimately not unjust. Yeah, I give you an example.
Please.
I had a student in Germany, and he was quite talented in Zen practice. And I thought I could bring him along quite further. But his wife tried to get him away from Zen practice because she saw me as competition. So she tried to get pregnant as fast as possible to make him focus on family life so he wouldn't focus on spiritual life. And she succeeded. In meditation, I had a vision that 700 years ago, I was an abbot in a Zen-Buddhist monastery in Japan. And he came to me, the same soul, with the same wife, just in different bodies. And he wanted to become a monk, but she didn't want that. So she said to me, can he not live with me in the village, but he comes to you for teaching and so on? And I said, no, that's not what we do. Because we have to deprogram monks from society, empty them out so we can give them the proper yogic conditioning. So we're not going to do that. He has to be a full-time monk. Same thing. She got pregnant as fast as she could, tied him down in family life. So 700 years ago, he made the same decision. If I would look into other lifetimes of his, he would have done it 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. Yeah? The human ego tricks the soul to believe that right now, when there's a key decision to be made between God and the world, that it's an individual, unique decision that was never made before. And that the current wife, for example, is special. But it's just a repeat of the same old, same old, same old. So in truth is, most souls have made the same decisions for thousands of years. And they're now reaping the consequences of those decisions. So they're not technically innocent.
You know, I hear you. There's a lot in that. But are we just slow learners then? You know?
Yeah. But that's all right, isn't it?
Of course it is. It is. But, you know, when we're knee deep in the pain or the suffering or the consequences, it's hard to see beyond that, hard to see the vantage point from the divine self and the eternal self when we really are in that pain and suffering in those moments, right? You know, it's to wade through that. But for sure. So, yeah, please, if you want to speak to that, go for it.
Well, let me share you one of my own mistakes.
Please.
Then it might make sense. One of my lifetimes that I reviewed was as a Tibetan Lama in a monastery in Tibet. And I was a young Lama at the time. And suddenly all these elder monks, they started whispering around me. And I was like, why are they whispering? I was expecting some sort of conspiracy, or did I screw up? What happened? So I didn't really understand. I was a little bit suspicious. And at some point, they start crowding me. And the thing that they were actually saying to each other, they were asking each other, do you think he's ready? Do you think he's ready? So then they came all up to me and said, okay, we're going to walk up the mountain. We're going to bring you to a certain place. And you're not to leave this place. So we start hiking up the mountain, and there's a cave. In that cave is a sadhu, an Indian yogi. Didn't even speak Tibetan, but he was speaking telepathically. And they said, you stay with this yogi, and you're not allowed to leave the cave. The yogi talks to me and says, Lama, drop your monk robe, grow your hair back, put on a loincloth, stop chanting mantras. I was furious because I had a spiritual ego. I was attached to the Tibetan way. I was attached to the robes. I was attached to the iconography, to the tradition, to the mantras, to the way the monasteries looked. So I was outwardly attached to an, let's say, exterior representation of something. And the yogi saw this immediately. He read my karma and he wanted to get me through to surrender. He wanted to get me through the last gate. And what he said was actually a compassionate act. He wanted to destroy my monk identity because it had become a prison. But I didn't see it this way. I ran down the mountain and I said, this heretic, this blasphemer, he doesn't understand anything about Buddhism. And I died in ignorance that lifetime. So my soul was grieving immensely on the other side. And then the spiritual hierarchy said, okay, we're going to give you another chance. And I got reborn as a Tibetan boy. I was like 6 years old. And suddenly this yogi walks into the house of my parents, also doesn't speak Tibetan, but tells them telepathically, this is my student. You got to give him to me. Then he took me away from my parents. And from the age of 6 or 7 years old, I lived for the rest of my life in a cave practicing with that yogi. But I want to be clear. Everybody is having opportunity all the time right now. They just choose to ignore it. God is constantly giving chances, constantly sending teachers or hints, and tries to speak through the experience through some sort of juxtaposition that is completely missed because there's no mindfulness. Yeah. So there is a difference between practitioners who are part of a spiritual hierarchy, and that is true lineage. It's not like, oh, you have learned from Yogi X, he gave you a paper, now you're his student, you're his descendant. It's not how it works. The lineage exists in spirit alone, and only there it is known. Only within the Holy Spirit, the truth there is known. Yeah? There are many legit yogis who have fake students, who later pretend that they are advanced yogis. They have the papers, but they're fake. And there are those who have no papers whatsoever. They can't prove any lineage, but their lineage is true. So everybody is getting opportunity all the time. If you see a homeless dog on the street, are you going to take the homeless dog in? It's up to you. But this is God in the homeless dog. And God watches you through the dog. What are you going to do? Everybody is constantly being given opportunity. It's just that they're ignorant to it. And because they're ignoring the opportunity for spiritual evolution, they then have to pay with suffering. Yeah. So, simple example. How does selling the soul work? Imagine there's a young man and he's a great artist, but his father is a lawyer. And the lawyer says, you can't make money with art. This is bullshit. Do something proper. Study in Harvard. And in order to get the law from his father, he starts suppressing his inner artist, which is his soul. So he starts dimming his light. He's pushing God out of his body, exiling God from the system. So he becomes a lawyer, right? He goes to Harvard, but every time he goes to a seminar, he's having a panic attack because his shadow, through which the soul speaks, is trying to fight the containment that the ego has created. And every human being at every moment makes a choice to love, to be compassionate, to learn, or to be ignorant, to be selfish, and to ignore. And this accumulates over thousands of years. And at some point, the debt is collected at the end of a yuga, like right now. And that's the truth of it.
I was going to ask you, I was just conscious of time. I've got about 10 minutes left before I have to call it. But what is the journey of the soul then? Where we keep reincarnating? I mean, you were speaking about 75,000 years, lifetimes ago. Like, that's a lot of hours we're putting into something, even though, you know, beyond reality, it's non-linear. What is the purpose of it all? Like, how do you see it playing out?
Well, God has a dream. At the beginning of everything, and you will find this in many texts, it doesn't matter if these texts are Egyptian, if they're Buddhist, if they're Hindu, whatever. Everything speaks of the void, the emptiness, the absolute absence of anything. No time, no quality, no dimensions, nothing. So God ultimately cannot see himself because he doesn't exist in a perceivable way. So God had a dream, like a little toddler in the kindergarten who is using building blocks to build little realities with towers. God had a dream of recognizing himself. But in order to recognize himself, which wasn't directly possible, he had to create a mirror. And the mirror is experience. By creating a limited set of experience that is other than God, because God is not limited, doesn't experience time, has no identity, has no personality, has no individuality, but through the experience of energy, God can reverse engineer himself as not that, not the limited experience, not the energetic patterns, not the personality, not the body, not this, not this, niti. Yeah, in the Hindu practice, not that, not that, not that. So the idea is that when we have amnesia of who we are and we fall into manifestation and we get identified and then we wake back up and we reverse engineer who we are painting an individual portrait of God through our own individual return. And this delights him very much.
So with that in mind, then does that mean as a soul, we just continue reincarnating, or is there a point of actualization where we don't come back? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there is a definite point after the spiritual lessons have been learned, through surrender. When surrender begins, the true spiritual practice begins. Before, it's all ignorance. So when surrender begins, when a proper teacher is found, and the teacher is key here, because a genuine teacher is an extension of God. And those people nowadays who believe that they can do it without a teacher, that they can just go on social media, use that technique, this technique, they will not go far. They are teachers that are assigned by God. They're not assigned by people, by institutions, or by systems. They're also not self-assigned. They will have definite experiences of a divine nature that tell them that they are a teacher and what their job is. When such a teacher is found, enormous progress can be made. Hundreds of years of karmic struggle can be dissolved in one lifetime. But it takes tremendous concentration and willingness to give up a worldly life, give up your attachments, give up your desires. Without that, it is not possible. That's a fact. And it is ultimately about transcending the form, changing the form through yoga, bringing it under soul control. And it is about burning up the ego or the identity, the perceived personality that has been shaped through many lifetimes. And we burn it up through generating wisdom from pain. The more we turn pain into wisdom, that's the alchemical process. At some point, we become very light in spiritual gravity, so the lower realities cannot hold us anymore. So when death then comes, we go where we are an energetic match to. So if we haven't indulged in sexual obsessions, for example, if we had transmuted that through the proper tantra and so on, our energy is so modified that it cannot be held by the lower realities. And this is the experience of enlightenment.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. I'll have to wrap up the podcast in a minute. As you sharing as well, the whole podcast, I've just been taken in and admiring your backdrop behind you, Julian. Very, it's looking very Peruvian, very different to where I am in Australia right now, mate.
It's a mud house.
It's fantastic, mate. Yeah, I see the flags behind you, the prayer flags. You got the fireplace and the bed and that. And it's like, wow. Where in Peru are you? Just out of curiosity.
I am in the Sacred Valley.
Just
Yeah.
down towards Machu Picchu way then.
Yeah, in Urubamba right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Because long term, the goal is to build a monastery in the mountains. I was guided to do that. And I own land there. And the Andes have similar qualities like the Himalayas. So certain practices are very supported there.
Gotcha. No, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, because Peru is obviously renowned for the psychedelics and ayahuasca. People come down for it. It's almost like tourism down there in some ways, isn't it? And it's nice to see yourself there. How close are you to getting that monastery off the ground?
Well, that has been very difficult because if I receive any money, it needs to come without conditions. And in the last 3 years, I was offered 3 times a big amount of money. But I was told in meditation by protector deities to not take the money because it would have led to a corruption of the monastic tradition. I'm trying to build something that is of a great purity. And when it comes to money, most people will use it as a power tool, will try to control me, will try to control the monastic traditions, will try to use it to enhance their own egos in some way. And I cannot allow this. Yeah. I rather end up homeless and starve.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, good on you. Mate, where can people find out more about you? You got a YouTube channel as well, don't you? You're putting out some videos and as well, educational stuff, I believe, on YouTube.
Well, yes, I'm putting out especially stuff about spiritual corruption and spiritual discernment because this is very needed right now. So if people are interested in that, in proper yogic practices, or let's say the Buddhist system as well, they can just Google my name, or put my name into the search function of YouTube. You will find my work. If you want to get in touch with me or book a session, it's very simple. It's thelighthouse.pe. Anybody can go there and reach out to me.
Mate, thank you for coming on the podcast. Really nice to connect, Julian. And thank you for a very interesting 1 hour of my time. And I have no doubt a lot of people will get a lot out of this today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, man.
Thank you very much for giving me this platform. I'm deeply grateful to you. And I enjoyed myself.
You're welcome, mate. Good on you, son. Thank you.